Well, you are. You've got to admit it.
I don't know whether Richard remembers me from Mythicist Milwaukee, but pass on to him that I really, really enjoy the work he does. But my only caveat, which I've stated here and a lot of times, is that I would love to see him present his argument, assuming, okay, and throwing into an alternate hypothesis, keeping everything intact, but assuming that the Pauline epistles are all forgeries, not relying on a 50 AD real Paul. Okay?
Yeah, that would be cool. I think
that would be
the reason
cool. I bet, because I look at it as, like a scientific hypothesis. Oh, this is cool. Pull out this element, though, and make it all work, and I'm going to be more convinced. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think that would be more convincing. That's in my opinion. I'm sure that could be more
Well, to
convincing
me, it's like
towards
I'm trying
you.
to disprove this one mythical character by using this other possibly mythical character.
He got his stuff peer-reviewed and published.
Well, peer review, yeah. So was a lot of stuff that's also been changed. Darwin was peer-reviewed, and we modified that theory a lot.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it was invalid, though. Darwin's...
A lot of what Darwin postulated was invalid. I mean, he was on the right track, but he had a lot of errors. That's what science does.
Yeah, but that's
we
like
go
everything.
along and we say, this is great, that's great. This is a little weird here.
Honey, please.
What?
That's what I'm saying, honey, please. That's what all of science does. You can't say Darwin was invalid because we changed his shit years after he was.
I'm not saying he was completely invalid. I said there were errors.
Yeah, there were errors.
That's not saying he's invalid.
But it's still valid.
So did Einstein.
No, but you're right.
And I'm saying that Carrier, I think, made mistakes by using Peter, who is, in my opinion, as much a mythical character as Jesus, and he's trying to make Jesus disappear by creating a real Paul. And that to me is something that if he takes it out will strengthen his argument.
He's not creating a real Paul. He's looking at the evidence accepted by consensus. And
we're having the same argument I did with Richard. And he's got him and Bart. You got to hang on to that Paul because everything falls apart without those seven.
That's consensus. So he's taking consensus and assessing the consensus with his evidence.
Take consensus, then we'll take the consensus of the population that God exists. Consensus is a lousy argument.
Yeah, but you can still take the consensus and make an argument against it. He's not making an argument for Paul. He's making an argument against Jesus.
By using Paul.
Yeah, because that's a consensus.
That's like I'm going to disprove Zeus by proving that Hercules is real.
Paul is historically accepted. How are you going to change history if you don't accept the consensus and work from there? People are not going to accept your theories if you cannot work within the basis they've set.
If I can, guys, the reason historians think there was Paul was because we have 7 letters that are pretty consistent with someone that was around about a generation after the supposed ministry.
No.
Now, if I can, without any yelling, because this is turning into a yelling match. I don't want to hear yelling. Come on, let's take a deep breath and let's discuss Paul patiently, because we all agree that even if he wasn't real, everything about Paul was full of shit. Paul. Here's the thing. The other reason I think that historians agree that Paul was probably historical is the fact that we're pretty sure Christianity at the beginning was just a Jewish sect. It was nothing but Jews following Jewish law. They just happened to believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and that this was a renunciant group that gave up all their worldly goods and believed the apocalypse was just around the corner. Now, according to what historians can tell from Paul's epistles, he was the guy that basically thought that was a fringe group of apostate Jews, and he was persecuting them. And then he converted, and he was the one that came up with the idea that Gentiles can join this group. Basically, Paul, as far as historians can tell, is the guy that bridged Christianity from just being a Jewish sect to being a Gentile religion too that kind of proselytized to non-Jews. And the reason why, that's one reason. The other reason is, of course, we have 7 epistles that have a consistent grammar, that have a consistent message, and that have a timeline.
Yeah, we had 2 of those in the modern day. One was the Adolf Hitler diaries. The other was the autobiography of Howard Hughes. All written by the same hand.
So I think
all proven to be frauds because we had modern resources to research that. All we have about the epistles is 7 letters that are consistent with a single author that appear only in manuscripts of the late 2nd century. There's nothing to place that person.
Bring it down. Just
If I
bring it down.
can.
50 AD, except for I need that to make my argument.
If I can.
Okay.
And without Paul, everything falls to pieces.
If I can.
So you're saying without Paul, Richard's argument falls to pieces?
If I can.
I'm saying if he doesn't pull it out, he's conceding that his argument can't stand without a real Paul.
No, I disagree.
About his support of Jesus.
I
Both are relying on Paul.
Bring your voice down a bit.
Look, I'm going to start muting people.
Yeah,
I'm muting myself because this is now you're talking to me like theists talk to you. I just want to put that in perspective.
I'm talking to the entire group. I'm talking the entire group here. The voices are getting raised, and we're not getting anywhere.
If I can, I was going to say there's actually a mythicist that does discuss Paul's historicity, and that's Robert Price. Robert Price discussed Paul's historicity. If you want to, I believe he even wrote a book about it called the Something Fantastic Apostle Paul.
The Amazing Colossal Apostle. I've read it. It's a fantastic book.
So yeah, there is discussion about this, and I think, again, like before, we can have that conversation. We can have that conversation just as much as we can have the conversation about Moses' historicity. We don't have to. We can offend as many people as we want, but it's an easy conversation to have, and I think.
My point is, we can definitely talk about Paul, but my whole thing was just I don't think that Richard's argument is rendered void if we discover Paul was real, because Richard's making an argument against Jesus based on their evidence that's consensus. It's like if the scientific community, just as an example, and I know this isn't exactly a valid comparison, but if the scientific community has a consensus that this is how something behaves, unless you test that that's how something behaves and prove it wrong, no one's going to listen to you if you just say, well, no, that's not how it behaved. And that's my point. So it doesn't.
And that's exactly what I'm asking Richard and Bart to both do, is in their hypothesis, remove Paul and see if your hypothesis still stands up. If not, then you're admitting that your hypothesis relies solely upon Paul.
No,
and one of the ones who is in my side with not even accepting Paul as a historical figure is Kenneth Humphreys, who details every single letter and all of the reasons why this person is very likely a much later invention and is not a first century person.
So I don't know how much you know about Richard Carrier's studies, but from my understanding, he was reviewing the evidence, and it showed that what little evidence there is not enough to suggest Jesus was real. So that wasn't creating a theory or a hypothesis himself. He's reviewing the evidence and then got that review of the evidence peer reviewed.
Well, my question here is, when you're talking about removing Paul, are you removing the putative person who wrote the message, or are you removing the message itself? I mean, if you remove the message itself, my thought is then you've got nothing.
Yeah.
But if you remove the putative writer, someone wrote the message. Because we seem to have that consistent grammar, we have that consistent message. So there's, I mean,
we have
Diana,
evidence
you want to
at
call
the
him
very
Paul, if
least.
you want to call him Joe.
Yeah, we have evidence at the very least that this was a consistent person, regardless of who that person was.
And I agree with that. I agree with the consensus that the 7 letters are consistent with a single author. I'm not diminishing the message. There's a lot of stuff in those letters that I kind of like, which I've said earlier. But I am not convinced that there is sufficient historical evidence for placing that author to be a real person in 50 AD any more than there is evidence to place a Jesus character at 30 thereabouts.
I think you're
AD.
missing.
Well, I mean,
I
that,
don't
that's
know, but you might be. My position isn't that like this person is like real or the messages are necessarily valid or good. Like I'm not doing this religious. Oh my God, I like Paul. I don't even know anything about him. My whole point is that an argument can still be sound if you're taking their position and showing how it can be falsified. And to me, that's, at least if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but that was Richard Carrier's position. He took their position and falsified it.
And I'm falsifying him. I mean, this is a two-way street.
Okay, no, but this is where I don't understand how you're falsifying him, because let me finish.
I'm giving him a falsifiable. Listen to it, God.
Let me finish. Regardless, take the name away, the text is still there. The text,
I was about to say that.
These people.
The text exists.
The text.
So what?
The text exists. Let me finish. Let me finish.
Prove anything about a Paul.
Are you going to let me finish, or are you going to interrupt me consistently?
Well, finish up then.
Okay.
I'm saying the same thing over and over.
Well, no, because you interrupt me mid-sentence. So I have to repeat myself to clarify.
Let's have that little touch of civility going here, okay?
So,
all of us, please.
Regardless if we attribute this to Paul or not, the text still exists. And the consensus amongst the people that believe in this stuff is that Paul's, or whoever the letters are authentic. So if you're going to make an argument against the consensus, you have to accept their argument to be able to prove it false. If you don't accept their argument, you have no way of proving them false.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying, Demi, is you have to have that as a starting point.
Yeah.
If any proof against it is going to be a proof of contradiction.
Yes.
And what I'm saying, if you won't interrupt me, is that there is no evidence based on those 7 second century manuscripts that the Paul as alleged to exist ever existed in circa 50 AD. And if you're going to use that in a hypothesis and say that, yes, he was real, the burden is on you to prove that Paul is a real person. Not, oh, we have a consensus based because we think these 7 letters are written by Joe Blow, therefore we know that Paul existed. It doesn't work that way. Take Paul out of the equation.
I really don't understand what you're trying to say.
And prove the mythicism of Jesus, which I agree with. I'm just saying, take Paul out of your argument for mythicist Jesus.
Then how?
And if it stands, it's a valid argument. If it doesn't stand, then it rests upon Paul, and then you need to attack the historicity of Paul as well.
So go ahead. How would an argument like that work?
Prove that Paul exists. Take Paul out of all your arguments for
so what is
the
an argument
myth of Jesus. Just remove Paul completely and make your argument. That's all.
One at a time. One at a time. One at a time.
What is that argument? Don't tell me what you do in the argument. Make that argument. What is the argument against the historicity of Jesus without Paul?
So.
And no, that is not admitting I'm an atheist for any theists listening in or whatever.
No, I was saying.
I'm frustrated. It is your and Carrier's position, your hypothesis.
No, you're
I'm saying your hypothesis of all of the evidence for a mythical Jesus and just take all the references to Paul out of it and see if it still stands.
There is no real evidence either way. That's the point. So tell me what your argument would be.
Because you're arguing, and so does Richard, that Paul actually existed in 50 AD and wrote those 7 letters because the consensus said so.
No, I'm not. You just
You just did a little while ago. You're relying on that consensus.
Wait, what Demi was saying.
Go ahead and see if you understood it. Nutja?
Well, shit, I'm in the middle of writing something else up at the moment. So
what I'm saying is that I'm not accepting whether Jesus is real or not. I'm not accepting whether Paul is real or not. We're making an argument against their evidence. It's not saying Jesus is real. It's saying your evidence is inadequate. That's the point here. It's not, oh, I'm making this statement to say Paul is real and all of my arguments are based upon Paul. No, the thing is, I'm making an argument against your evidence, and your evidence doesn't stand up on its own.
I don't have evidence for Paul, and nobody else does. That is my point.
Not you, the consensus.
I'm not making a positive claim. I'm making a negative, not making a claim. Anyone who says Paul existed at 50 AD needs to prove that just as much as anybody who says Jesus actually was a real person needs to provide evidence because they're making a positive claim. Yeah, I say I do not believe that Jesus was a real person. I do not believe that Paul was a real person because there is no evidence historically to back either one of those claims up.
Regardless if you call the person Paul or not, there's evidence that this was written by the same person. So forget the name.
Okay, one person wrote 7 letters in the middle of the 7th century. So what?
I hate to throw
the letters are there. That's so much.
I hate to throw gasoline on this, but the 7 letters do begin with Paul's name.
So did the Hitler diaries. So does let's see, Genesis begins with God's name. It doesn't.
I was gonna say that's not a great proving point, is it?
Yeah, put in your name. Let's see. Oh, so Thomas really existed and wrote the Gospel of Thomas because it starts off with these are the words of Jesus as told to Thomas Didymus.
The whole point is you're arguing a point that no one's making.
Yeah, you are making it.
No, I'm not. You're creating a straw man.
I can't figure out what the point is.
Neither can I.
I don't